I'm sure many of you have had an experience like this, where you pitch an idea or concept and it turns out someone's already done it, in many respects better. A few weeks ago I made a video where I discussed the possibilities for an official Zelda dungeon maker in the same vein as Mario Maker. I talked about how I think it could be done and how to handle some of the mechanics that come into play when constructing a dungeon-like environment. My overall conclusions came down to keep it simple. No coding, no node setups, nothing too complex that would discourage the average player. After all, just like Mario Maker, it's supposed to be a video game and not a game engine, something everyone can have fun with. Turns out there's already a project like this in development right now, Super Dungeon Maker, a game where you create your own dungeons, upload them, and play other people's creations. There's even future plans for a single-player story mode. There were quite a few different projects brought to my attention in the comment section of my original Zelda Maker video. Many of them fan projects like Super Zelda Maker and Z-Quest Classic, or game engines specifically designed for 2D action RPGs like Solaris and Legend Maker. But Super Dungeon Maker was by far the most popular suggestion, and it's easy to see why. The Solaris engine and Legend Maker are both amazing projects. However, they are not video games. There's no pick up and play element to them. They are PC-only development tools for aspiring game designers. As for Super Zelda Maker and Z-Quest Classic, again, very impressive projects, but in my video I was talking about something official, something that would actually get published, preferably and selfishly on a platform that I own. And well, realistically speaking, given Nintendo's track record, there's just no way they would ever endorse a Zelda fan project like this, let alone publish it on their own platform, regardless of quality. Super Dungeon Maker, on the other hand, features its own distinct art style and characters so as not to infringe on any copyright. In fact, just recently it widely surpassed its Kickstarter goals to get the game published on Nintendo Switch, so it's well on its way to join the many indie gems already present on the system. As such, in today's video, I want to talk about the game for a bit, to show its potential compared to the ideas I talked about in my video and what to expect from it in the future. Now, full disclosure, this is technically a sponsorship. After seeing my Dungeon Maker video, the people behind the game reached out to me to see if I was perhaps interested in covering their project, since, well, it does almost exactly what I talked about in the video. Those who are well acquainted with me and my channel know that I normally don't do sponsorships. I tried it once and I hated every second of it, but I decided to make an exception because I did quite literally ask for a game like this to be made. And after spending a few afternoons playing it, I can safely say that unlike Raid Shadow Legends, this is a game I genuinely support and want to talk about. And while yes, I am getting paid a modest fee for my efforts, my one condition was that I would be given complete freedom to voice my own opinions and potential criticisms, and not become a salesman for the game, which they wholeheartedly agreed with. With all that said, let's take a look at Super Dungeon Maker. First and foremost, let me get this out of the way first because it's by far the most important aspect of the game. You play as a chicken. Right there, that's 10 out of 10 Game of the Year material because chickens are the best, and if you disagree, Mifa here wants to have a strong word with you. While Super Dungeon Maker is definitely its own thing, it's also very self-aware about its inspirations. I mean, our hero's name is Fink, whose ancestors migrated from a place called Henrule. Like I said, 10 out of 10. Gameplay-wise, if you've played any 2D Zelda, you'll feel right at home. 5 hearts indicate your health, you attack with a sword, there's a hook shot, bombs to blow up walls and blocks, flippers which give you the ability to swim, and a feather to skip across chasms and hazards or dodge attacks. In terms of graphics, I think most will agree that the game looks absolutely gorgeous. The detailed sprite work and the fluid animations, it's all amazing, and reminds me how much I wish Nintendo would go back to the Minish Cap art style someday. Hitting enemies just feels so satisfying. I could do this all day. I also like how the sword swings alternate, kinda like a 2-hit combo, as opposed to the single sword strike in most 2D Zeldas. Something I never touched upon in my video is what to do if a player happens to get stuck somehow. Since we're dealing with dungeons made by everyday people and not professional level designers accompanied by playtesters and such, the chance of accidentally getting stuck due to an oversight in the level design is close to inevitable, and did happen to me on more than one occasion. Sure, you could just exit the level and start over, but this can be a bit demoralizing if it means losing a ton of progress, especially if it's a big dungeon. The game gets around this problem by including a sort of rewind mechanic. It'll place you back at the entrance of the room you're currently in while also resetting any progress you've made in said room, including health pickups, chests you've opened, and enemies you've defeated, so it's kinda like a save state. The only thing I would change about it is that currently it also restores any damage you've taken, so you can essentially use it as a bit of a cheat and just keep resetting the room when you're close to dying. I'd say reset everything except the HP. The mechanic should serve as a way to avoid soft blocks and not as an easy do-over. Aside from that, it's a clever fix and it works. Honestly, there's not a whole lot more to say about the controls or the gameplay. Like I said, it plays just like a Zelda game, and a competent one at that. I do have a few complaints like the absence of button mapping, or at the very least the option to assign quest items to a face button of your choice. I'm one of those OCD snobs who always want certain items to be on a specific face button, you know, for muscle memory. However, it should be noted that while the game has been available on Steam since February 2022, as of yet it's still in early access and constantly being worked on and updated. As such, I'm also not going to dive into stuff like performance, bugs, and glitches. I did encounter my fair share of anomalies here and there, like text boxes that wouldn't go away or the hub world not loading properly, but I think it would be unfair to focus on these types of issues too much and wait until the game is, actually finished. I'd say overall the game runs just fine. It crashed on me once, but my capture software was also acting up that day, so I'm not even sure if the game was to blame for this. That said, if you're interested in the game yourself and want to help test and improve the project, the studio has a dedicated Discord server where you can report your findings and provide feedback. It bears repeating that this is a work in progress. The same can be said about the hub world. It's from here that you'll be able to access the different game modes, like a tutorial level for dungeon building, the dungeon builder itself, and the Eggspedia, where you can play other people's creations. And right now, that's about all there is to it. There's a few NPCs to talk to who give you tips and funny references, but you cannot enter most of the houses, and as mentioned before, there's currently no story mode. It's clear that this is a part of the game that's still under construction, which is to be expected with an early access title. So let's instead jump into the main selling point of the game, which is of course the dungeon editor. And here's where it blows my own ideas completely out of the water. In my video, I opted for two separate editors, one for the dungeon map and one for individual rooms. My reasoning was that since Zelda dungeons tend to have some sort of transition between rooms, it would make sense to design them separately and then assemble them in a map editor so the engine knows where one room ends and the other one starts. But Super Dungeon Maker shows that it can all be done in one editor, and it's a clever system. If you create two separate spaces close to each other, the game will treat them as one singular room, regardless if they are connected or not. But if you space them out by a certain amount of tiles, I think 4, the editor will regard them as separate and draws an outline around each one. This way, when playing the dungeon, the engine knows which areas to load or unload, as well as highlight the room you're currently in while obscuring the rest. This method also eliminates the problem I mentioned in my video about doorways potentially not lining up properly when you create them in a separate editor. Here you just place a doorway in between them and there you go, problem solved. As for shaping, designing and decorating the rooms themselves, it works almost exactly the way I described it in my video, so I don't have much to add here. Probably the biggest difference compared to my ideas aside from the editor itself is the way puzzles and object interactions are set up. In my examples I proposed a system where you link objects together by dragging and dropping, again similar to Mario Maker. While this does apply to placing collectibles inside chests, pots, grass and so on, when it comes to puzzle elements like switches, spawning items or enemies or triggering doors to open, Super Dungeon Maker's approach is quite different. For every self-contained space there's a total of 9 channels available, kinda like the channels on a radio. Assigning a channel to an object will cause it to either trigger or listen for that channel depending on what kind of object it is. So for example, if you add a floor switch and a door and set them both to channel 1, the door will open as soon as the switch is pressed. You also have access to spawners, despawners and area triggers which can be used to create puzzles or traps. I'm not going to give a whole tutorial on how it all works. In fact, there's already a dedicated YouTube channel that explains many of the basics, which I will link in the description. But needless to say, you can do a lot of cool stuff with this system. Now, do I have any complaints? Well, yeah, I do. However, similar to the gameplay, it's mostly a matter of wanting to see more. More enemies and traps, more puzzle objects, more tiles and dungeon themes, more quest items and collectibles, a wider selection of music tracks, and more ways to customize the dungeon's look and feel. The amount on offer right now probably isn't enough to keep most people invested for very long, and playing other people's creations for more than an hour or so did make this all the more apparent, as it didn't take long before dungeons started to feel similar. Same goes for the type of puzzle setups I was able to concoct with the options that are available right now. However, what is present is a very, very solid basis. One with a lot of potential and hard work behind it. The entire game is being developed by just 2 people. I mean, how crazy is that? The devs have made it clear that they have all the motivation in the world to keep expanding the game, especially now that it's slated for a Nintendo Switch release. Their stretch goals include the aforementioned story mode, more playable characters besides Fink, a new dungeon theme, and likely much more depending on the game's success. That's kind of the beauty of indie projects like these. Most AAA studios are often juggling multiple IPs and projects at the same time and kinda reside in an ivory ivory tower. Meanwhile, indie developers are much more accessible and open to feedback, and are more focused on one project since they don't have a whole battalion of people on the payroll. Thus, the community can actually be involved in shaping the final product. It's worth mentioning that the title of this video should obviously be taken with a grain of salt. It's not meant to be a stab at Nintendo, and there's many valid reasons why they wouldn't want to publish a Zelda-based dungeon maker of their own. Be it time restraints, different priorities for the Zelda IP, a lack of inspiration, or maybe they simply don't see it as a worthy time investment, who knows. Like I said before, a dungeon maker type of game like this would require continuous expansions and updates in order to keep a player base invested over a long period of time, because the player base is the main driving force behind these type of games. If there's not enough people creating new dungeons, it's basically game over. And as we've seen with the latest Animal Crossing, Nintendo is already having a hard time staying committed to long-running projects, so maybe a community-driven indie project is the way to go. With that said, if you see the same potential I do and want to contribute, you can either back the project up on Kickstarter, buy the beta version on Steam, and/or join the Discord community, both of which you can find a link to in the description below. Also, despite being early access, there are about 1,500 dungeons made by the community available to play right now, so there's plenty enough to keep you busy. I had a lot of fun with the game in the past week or so, and I'm interested to see what the future holds for it. I have my gripes and wishes, but I prefer to save those for the finished product, possibly the Switch version. My goal was not to dissect the game and spend 40 minutes talking about every change I'd like to see, big or small. I wanted to bring it to more people's attention, because I feel like it's a project worth keeping an eye on and to support it if you have the means to. And that is all for now. A big thanks to RokaPlay for reaching out to me and letting me try out the game, to my mods, Patreons, and channel members, and to Morel and SJRD and Angel Drexter for joining. You guys are awesome. I will see you all in the next video. This is Dawn, signing off, and have a good one.